Okay.
Good day. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm the Reverend Marion Lucas Jeffries, and I'm one of the two coordinators of the Environment Network for the Anglican Diocese of Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island. I'd like to welcome you to this interview, one of a series of YouTube interviews stemming from weekly gatherings called Spiritually Connected Through Creation. Today, I'm speaking with Nancy Blair, a counseling therapist and an active member of the Environment Network, also known as DEN. I'm here to ask Nancy about eco-grief, a term that I've heard from environmental activists frequently this past year. And so, welcome, Nancy.
Thanks, Marion. It's good to see you.
Nancy, as a therapist certified in pet loss and bereavement and a passionate Christian activist presently working in an eco-psychology framework, would you please explain what eco-grief is?
Well, eco-grief is what it says it is. It's grief about what's happening in our environment and in the world. Now, most of us are very familiar with grief over our lifetime. We learn how to deal with it, good or bad, or we work our way through it and we learn how to do it. And I've done a lot of work with clients individually on working with family or loss of family, loss of job. I've also done a lot of work with pet loss and bereavement counseling. And each grief is similar, and there's commonalities, there's also difference. Eco-grief really strikes me for two reasons. First of all, we've been hearing this term for about a year, but I would have to say it is still what we call disenfranchised, which means it has no formal way for people to work through this kind of grief. Like if you have a family member die, you've got possibly funerals, you hopefully can get together and talk, but eco-grief is still out there. The other thing which is very encompassing or really kind of terrifying about eco-grief is it doesn't stop. Once you become aware of what's happening to the world, it continues. And I checked the numbers. The UN is saying we're losing 150 to 200 species per day. And if you can say that without having incredible amount of grief and wanting to cry, well, you're tougher than me. So this grief is powerful, and it seems to be popping up in many ways and in many places. And we need to know how to work with it.
So it is different in a way from other forms of grief.
It is.
Okay. Well, how did you come to take such a strong interest in the subject?
Well, I'm a therapist, as you said. I'm coming from a range of backgrounds. I started in environmental studies, so I have a master in environmental studies and committed to the environment. I've worked in social justice, development, and peace for many years. I've also worked with persons with disabilities looking for work, and then I became a counselor. And in my last few years of working as a counselor, I started to work in animal-assisted therapy and counseling, and then into pet loss and bereavement counseling. It sounds, when you list all this, it sounds a bit like the Just Recovery program that we're looking across in Canada, which we try to relate to so well. So I've seen this from a lot of different ways. And this eco-grief so I've come to it from that way. There's also books, and as you recall, we did the Citizens for Public Justice. We used their book, Living Ecological Justice, in the Den, in a program last spring, sort of. We're moving into the fall now. And it talks about grief, but also about what we need to do about it. And I'll get into that in a few minutes. But basically, I'm looking at it from a lot of different ways, and we're hearing about eco-grief coming from a lot of different communities, and that's really important.
So why do you believe that it's important for people to understand the term?
I think it is because, first of all, we look at what's happening in the world. And I think many people are dealing with this. we've seen in the last years, because as you know, for the Den, I've been watching articles since January or before to see the trends that are coming on. We're seeing eco-grief, eco-anxiety, eco-despair. It keeps going, eco-depression, all of these things that are coming up because of what's happening in the world. And again, how do people deal with it? I'm very concerned, of course, of saying, how do we keep people from slipping into eco-despair, eco-grief, which is so powerful? I had a period of time last fall and I was getting these waves of grief and anger, and I just like, whoa, nobody had died. All my family was well. There was no major crisis in my life. As a therapist, I thought, well, maybe I haven't dealt with a past issue. But then I started to realize, no, this is eco-grief. And I started to see it in other people. And it is incredibly strong. I did an interesting course with a Charter of Compassionate Education on death and dying, grief and climate change. And then I became aware of the vocabulary that we're seeing as well. One word that I saw was eco-fury, which made incredible sense to me, because this is the fury that people are seeing about what's happening in the world. And again, this comes across as anger. As a therapist, I'm saying, well, are you angry at your father? Are you angry at your mother? Are you angry at and it's, no, some people are angry about what's happening in the world and need to do something about it. And this is where we get into what do we do with this?
Yeah, because you say that eco-grief can also be a gift. Well, can you explain that?
Yes, and this is where I'm getting to. First, I'll go back to when we deal with grief in our life. I'm sure you can think of yourself or someone who has taken a situation which was incredibly difficult and caused them much grief and transformed them. Eco-grief, I think, has the potential to do that with us. It's to help people. So we don't want people to be overwhelmed, because it's so easy these days about what's happening in the world, in the environment, let alone what's happening in all other spheres of life. But we don't want that. We want people to have some way of saying, okay, I'm feeling just awful. A year ago, I was hearing people say that one thing that I heard often was people were saying to me, I want to go to this place before it's ruined. And I'm like, did you hear what you said? Why are you not stopping it from being ruined? Why do you want to go to it before it is ruined? And I would say, in my opinion, that's not the best approach to deal with eco-grief. So eco-grief is a gift in the sense that it makes us realize how deeply we personally are feeling what's happening in the world. And why do we feel that? This is the next important step. And I'll just briefly get into that before another question I want to talk about. But we're feeling this eco-grief because we are part of creation. We are not something sitting outside creation. We are part of creation. So every time a species dies, something in us dies. So of course we're going to feel grief. So the gift of grief is that we understand more and more and more how important it is that we understand our place in creation, not as something oppressing creation, but something that has a part in creation. And we don't even really in some ways have the language. We saw this passion and drive for people to connect with nature since we've been with COVID. People want to get out. People need to get in nature. That's what's sustaining them. But are they actually connecting with, this is something they love so passionately? And this is what's coming out in some of the, again, with living ecological justice I mentioned before. And one of the questions is, can we or do we love the earth enough to save it? And this is why eco-grief is sort of like people sign, oh my goodness, I care. I have not seen a case where people become aware of eco-grief and then you can shut it down. So that's where I'm at the point, is like, how are we going to deal with it? So this is a gift that we can say, I am connected with the earth. That's why I'm feeling such grief.
Okay. So, as people concerned about the health and well-being of the planet, we recognize it and then we take action. That's what I'm hearing you say. And so that's how we deal with the eco grief. And so, how about you on a personal level? How are you able to deal with your own eco grief?
Well, that's a complicated thing. And as you said, and I'll go back to other times of grief, as a counselor, anyone that goes to a counselor or a therapist to help them deal with grief, one of the things we often say is take your time, work through it. Do the right things, take care of yourself. Don't do too much. So there's all sorts of things that are natural, sort of in the natural grieving process that we say to people. Pet loss and bereavement is simply similar. Now, what we're hearing from very different sources is that we don't have a lot of time. And with ecological grief, what I'm saying to myself and to others is that, yes, we need to have ways of grieving. We need to have ways of mourning. We need to act. One of my favorite expressions today is, what did you do to save the world today? Now, everyone is called to do different things.
Yeah.
And I am not saying anyone should do anything specifically, but in order to actually work through this grief, I don't think that we can take a period of a year or two and mourn. I think we need to say, in order to work through our grief, yes, we grieve, yes, we are aware of it, but we need to act. There is an International Day of Mourning in November for the species that have been lost. There are some things that maybe we need to build on more in the den and connect people with. But this is not a type of grief where we take a year off. This is the type of grief where we need to do things. I have found that that's one way that helps me get through this, that I there are days I take off, go watch TV and don't do anything. But most days I say, what am I going to do today? Because if I don't do that, the grief is overwhelming. And I am not going into despair. There's no time.
So action is the way of avoiding eco-despair. And perhaps in this pandemic time, when people are looking for a better normal, not the same normal,
Yes.
it's an opportunity to be able to move into the type of action that will not only prevent us from feeling that grief or despair, should I say. The grief is slipping into the despair, but it'll make a difference in the way we emerge from this crisis. Both crises, the crisis of climate change and the crisis of the pandemic.
Well, I think what we're seeing more, and I'll refer to the just recovery, which a lot of people have heard about. And I think we're all seeing that there's many things we want to change, and everything is interconnected. I'm focusing on environmental and ecological. That does not mean I'm prioritizing it as the only thing that needs changing. So again, people will be looking at different ways to act. And as you know, in the Den, what we do when we're doing in our spring program is we've got topics that we will appeal to a range of people. And many people in the Den, of course, are big gardeners. I'm a big gardener. And that's another thing, I know you are too, that's one of the things that's brought me eco grief, because for the last, I think, 15 years, we've seen changes. We've seen this coming. I'm in Dartmouth, and the last 2 summers we had water advisories. This year we didn't. But we're looking at drought in Nova Scotia, and it's the strangest feeling to be able to see the ocean but not have water in the wells. It's a very strange feeling. So, right back. So the Den, we picked different topics, and I must give you credit for all the work you've done with the Den and building a network of people that people like me can go to as like-minded people, that we can look for our actions and also be comfortable sharing some of our grief. and our eco-anxiety about what's going to happen, but to have some place where people can come together and express their fears, their grief, and also look for ways to move forward. So the den is a great access point for anyone to come in and see what we have.
Well, you're an active parishioner at St. Paul's Church in Grand Parade in Halifax, and you're a passionate Christian environmentalist. Might you share with us the role your faith plays in this work?
Well, for me, this is fundamental. I mean, I guess it's something I think it gives us strength. But I think also I view creation as coming from God. And it causes me pain to see species disappear. It causes pain for us not to be recognized in water. There was a recent article in The Guardian about the rights of soil. And we've slipped away, and I will emphasize that it's only in the last few hundred years that we've got so disconnected from nature. And so faith is really important to me. I view this as something we're here for. Eco-psychology, what we're hearing more and more of the language, we're not here to possess the earth, we're here to be part of the earth. Somehow we've lost our place. And I think sometimes as a counselor, but also a person of faith, we talk about humans having this great longing and loneliness, and we want more or something. And sometimes that's been used as a way of saying how humans will press until they achieve more. And as a person of faith, and also as a counselor, I'm starting to wonder if that's partly that we've just moved too far away from who we are actually in terms of our connection with the earth. So the faith is just, I see no separateness at all between my faith as a Christian and also my need as an activist to take care of God's creation.
And as an activist, you've been very active in the diocesan network, DEN. So why is that particular work important to you?
Well, it's a way for me to express what I need to do. Now, again, I'm going to go back to this separateness and speak for a minute just about eco-psychology, which is the framework I work in. And the basic premise is there, in order to heal ourselves psychologically, because we've moved so far away from our connection, we need to heal the earth. We need to heal the earth. We need to heal ourselves. It's a dual thing. And this is a premise. Now, in terms of activism, this is at the base of my activism. And it's also the faith, everything interconnects. When you ask me, is my faith a major part of it? It is. But people are coming into this work, activism, who are not people, what would we call people of faith in the Christian sense, or in a specific religion, and they are still feeling the same thing. So we were all feeling this and needing to act on it. Yes, I didn't quite answer your question. I got sidetracked. Ask me again.
Well, but what you said was really inspiring. So I'm going to ask you one last question, and that is, what gives you hope?
Oh, I thought about this. I thought about hope. I looked at the definition of hope. I was out dog walking this morning. It's a big part of my life. And usually I am a person, I'm a very hopeful person. I'm a very optimistic person. These days, I am really appreciating the language around COVID, the great pause. I think we're still in that. We're in a pause where we're waiting or seeing what will happen. I think people are still sorting this out. I believe that we can fix this, and we're hearing this. The Extinction Rebellion people, the scientists, Greta Thunberg, who I listen to a lot. Jane Goodall, people are saying we can change it, but we only have a certain amount of time. I feel a lot of hope because I know, and this is partly as a Christian, I will be given many, many chances over and over and over again to build this world. So I have hope in that. I don't have, I sit home and I watch the TV one day, I lose a chance. It's okay, I'll get more. So I believe, and I have this hope. I believe we can change it. We've seen this with COVID. The world can come together. Canada come together. Not everybody came together, but we can do this. So I have hope in that. I don't know what's going to happen. There are so many wonderful, wonderful things happening in the world. And I think this pause, this time, which is so full of fear and terror and hope and love and compassion, is a time for people to make a choice and to choose that we can deal with this. And we can make a just recovery, and we can have a better world. Now, that's where I'm going to go back to one more time, just to stress this with eco-grief. I do believe that it is something that we can use, that we can recognize, and that we can move forward knowing that, oh my goodness, I feel this because I love the earth so much. Oh dear.
That's beautiful.
Yes. Oh, and I must mention before I forget, so I will be starting a monthly support group for eco-grief, which I'm going to start and see. Part of the reason is I realized to keep doing this work, I need that support. So I figured other people need that support. So this will be a project of mine within the Den, but it's a project of mine which I think is extremely important to start working this through. And I would like to finish again saying the Den is a good, strong, safe place for people. It's a network. We are not expecting everyone to do the same program. We are expecting people to come and bring their gifts. And Marion, you are just wonderful in terms of helping people express their gifts, so I thank you.
Well, thank you, because you've been an inspiration. And, without you, we wouldn't have had the Thursday evening gatherings, and we wouldn't have these YouTube interviews either. And so I look forward to rebooting the Spiritually Connected Through Creation gatherings again in a couple of days. And thank you for being the moderator and the inspiration behind it. And so together we can just accomplish anything, and we can turn this around. So thank you very much for your time. And have a great day.